Eating healthy on a budget isn't just possible, it's necessary, especially with the cost of food skyrocketing. But so many people believe that eating well means spending more, which leads them to rely on ultra-processed, nutrient-lacking foods. I get it. When you're on a low income, every dollar counts, and convenience often wins. But today I'm showing you that healthy, home-cooked meals don't have to break the bank. These 5 budget-friendly recipes are easy, filling, packed with nutrients, and most importantly, affordable. Whether you're feeding a family or just yourself, these meals prove that real food is within reach, even when money is tight. So let's get into it. Here are 5 cheap and healthy meals that will nourish your body without emptying your wallet. Let's go. So for the first meal this week, I'm making this lentil curry, and I make this almost every week because Makai, my 1-year-old, absolutely loves it. It's super healthy and good for him, and it's very, very cheap. You only need a couple things, all of them being relatively affordable. Right now, I'm just chopping up some garlic. This isn't all for this recipe. I am just prepping it for the week ahead. And then I'm also chopping up some onion, and then as well as grating some ginger. All these are affordable where I live, but if they're not affordable where you live, because I know sometimes the prices of onions can get a little high, but if you buy them in bulk in a bag, you can usually get like a whole bag for a couple dollars. But if they are high, you can always just use the powder, and that's what I do. If the prices are too expensive that week or we don't have it in our budget, we usually have the powder on hand, and a bag of garlic powder or onion powder or even ginger powder is usually around like $1 to $2, and that can last quite a while. And you'll see me use those powders in a lot of these recipes, because a tip to save money on cooking from scratch is to use kind of the same spices and things like lentils or beans and just have them in stock and buy them in bulk. So you'll see me using those a lot here. And right now I'm just rinsing roughly 2 cups of lentils for the curry. It's important, if you think of it, because sometimes I know I do forget, to rinse your lentils because they can hold a lot of dirt and debris in them. And then next I'm just pouring a splash of my homemade veggie stock, which I have a recipe coming soon if you're interested in that, to fry the onions. Now you can use oil instead of this, but because we made the veggie stock from scratch, it's essentially free, so it's a lot more cost effective than the oil, and I just like to do that. And then I added a little bit more here, and I sauteed probably the onions for 5 to 8 minutes until they turn golden brown before adding the garlic and the ginger. And when I added it, I put it on low because you don't want to burn it. You only have to cook garlic and ginger for roughly a minute. And then for the spices for this, literally all I added was a tablespoon of curry powder, added some more vegetable broth, added the lentils in, added more vegetable broth, and then you just let it simmer until the lentils are fully cooked and soft. And that's literally basically it for this recipe. It's so easy, and once it is cooked, then that's when I add coconut milk to make it creamy and just to give it more flavor and extra fat, because babies need a lot of fat in their diet. I mean, so does everyone, but especially babies. And right now I'm just moving on to the bread. Homemade bread, when you make it yourself, is so cheap, and with these dishes I like to have a side of carbs, something affordable and cheap to fill us up. Today was bread, but we also pair this one with rice a lot, as you can see. Usually if I have it for leftovers, like I'll do one or the other. One day I'll do bread, one day I'll do rice. So right now I was just preheating this. I don't even know what kind of pan it is. It's not cast iron or a Dutch oven, which I eventually want to upgrade to. I'm just looking for it at the thrift store, but this was one that was given to us from a friend because his friend passed away and he had some kitchen stuff that he just gave to us. So I was preheating that and then put the bread inside of it and then cooked it for 30 minutes, took the lid off and cooked it for another 15 minutes at 475 degrees. If you would like this recipe, I'll link it down below, but I also showed it in my last video, so that's why I didn't show it here. And at this point the curry was done. It looks delicious, as you can see, and I was just taking a little bit out first for Makai so it could cool off while I was doing everything else and cutting the bread. And then I just served it with a little piece of bread, and he ate this all up. He loved it, and so did I. It was so good, and this bread recipe is so delicious, and also probably the cheapest bread ever. Sourdough is also cheap because you don't have to buy the yeast. The yeast can be a little expensive, but my sourdough was killed by Kai because he burned it by accident. So this bread recipe here is literally just whole wheat flour, salt and yeast and water. So no like other sugar or oil, so just a couple ingredients, so cheap. And yes, here's Makai just loving on the curry. He was pointing to it because he wanted more. Usually he feeds himself because it's, you know, good practice for motor skills, but lately he's not wanting to feed himself at all and will only eat if I feed him, although he does like to feed me. He likes to feed his mama here, as you can see. So, and I just wanted to show you here too that it pairs really well with rice as well. So I made some rice because we are going to eat this for leftovers tomorrow. If you had a bigger family, you could double or triple this recipe and then you might have leftovers, but because it's only me, Kai, and Makai, usually this amount leaves leftovers, which is perfect. That way I am never cooking lunch, so I really only cook dinner for scratch. Now on to the next recipe. This is carrot soup. This is also, again, cheap and easy. It's one of those ones, like the last one, you just put it all on the stove, let it cook, do its thing, and then it's ready. So it just takes a little bit to prep, just to cut your ingredients, and that's basically all. Here I am peeling and washing all my carrots, and I'm showing that I am saving my peels for my veggie stock, so will never have to buy a veggie stock again. And side note, sorry if you can hear Makai in the background. Everyone is home. It is the weekend, and the only time I can do this voiceover, and he's playing with Kai, and I think he just wants mama, but I'm going to finish the voiceover nonetheless. So now I'm just chopping the carrots. I just chopped a whole bag. I got these organic carrots. Side note, again, look at the prices of organic versus non, because for some things like carrots, they're literally the same. These organic carrots were actually cheaper than the non-organic. So I just peeled and cut up a whole bag of carrots. And for the whole bag, it was only $3. That's the good thing about carrots. It doesn't really matter what time of year it is. They're pretty affordable, and $3 for a whole bag, which is going to make a big soup, is good in my opinion. And then I also chopped up this onion because yesterday I only had a half, so I had to chop up some more. Then I grabbed a pot, my veggie stock, and all my ingredients before adding a little bit of veggie stock. And same with the last one, you could add oil instead. I just choose veggie stock because it's free. And then I sauteed the onion for roughly 8 minutes. And then for today's dinner, this one could also be paired with rice, but I actually decided to make some grilled cheese since I still had some fresh bread left. Grilled cheese, the bread is very cheap if you make it yourself, and cheese can be a little more expensive, but when you buy it in bulk, and also Kai works at a food distributing center, so he gets a pretty good discount on it. It's not that bad of a price. Right here I'm just adding my onions and ginger, same as yesterday, and sauteing it for a minute before adding some more veggie stock. And today I added some spices, just a little bit of this and that, nothing I really measured out, but I kind of grabbed for the same spices every time. I think I added onion powder, garlic powder, a little bit of turmeric, curry powder, and then salt and pepper just to give it a little more flavor. But that is optional, and you can add whatever spices that you like or you have. You could add cinnamon, really just anything, paprika. And then what you're going to want to do is completely submerge it in your veggie stock or water, whatever you have, and let it simmer until the carrots are soft and you can poke through them with a fork. So now moving back onto the grilled cheese. Like I said, cheese and butter can be a little more expensive, but like I said, Kai, for like our household, he works at a food distributing center, so he gets these things discounted. And as you can see, I kind of go very sparingly with the butter and cheese because they are the more expensive ingredients, but they are filling, and cheese and butter are good for you. So it's something that I'm willing to pay a little bit of money on. But if you can't afford it, you can always just eat this with rice or just bread like the last time. The grilled cheese is definitely not something that is necessary. Just we had the cheese and butter in the fridge, and Makai loves grilled cheese, so I thought it would be a nice side dish to change it up a little bit. But a lot of the times we'll just pair this with the bread or rice. And to cook the grilled cheese, I just put it in the oven at 400 for 5 minutes, flipped it and put it in for another 5 minutes. And then you can put it in a little bit longer, especially if you're using this homemade bread recipe, since it is a bit thicker if you want it more crispy. But this was fine for me and Makai, and you could also cook it on the stove top, but I just like it in the oven personally. I like the taste of it. And now that my carrots are soft, I kind of started blending it with immersion blender, but you could also just put it in a normal blender if you don't have one. But this was actually we found this off of Facebook Marketplace, one of those free groups, so I recommend looking for those if you need anything, because the amount of stuff people give away for free is crazy. And I probably could have cooked the carrots a little bit more for this dish, but I was making this while Makai was sleeping and I knew his nap time was running out, so I wanted to finish filming it before he woke up. And just, yeah, I paired the grilled cheese with this and it was time to eat, and Makai loved it. Again, this is another dish that he loves, I love, Kai loves, the whole family loves. Now it's the next day and we're moving on to the next dish, and today is pizza, which is probably Kai's favorite one that I make. I make this, again, this is one that I make a lot, probably every week roughly. It's so easy, it's very, very cheap. The dough is so cheap to make. Usually, like today, I'm making a double batch. So when I do make it the next time, I literally just take the dough out, let it on thaw, and then put toppings in. So it makes for a really, really easy dinner on days that I'm having a hard day or feeling lazy, like I don't want to cook. But today, I was making the dough to show you. And I'll just link the recipe down below. But it's essentially just flour, water, yeast, oil, salt, sugar. You just knead it all together, let it sit for an hour. It's really simple. It might seem intimidating when you're first starting, but once you get the hang of it, it's so easy to make dough. And this recipe here is actually my Mamie's recipe that my mom's been making for years and I've been making for years. I actually started this tradition when I used to nanny for 2 girls, that I'd make pizza dough every Friday and we'd have pizza. And I kind of kept that in the tradition. Like I usually make the pizza on Friday, but not all the time. And right here, I'm just putting my homemade bowl covers on and putting it in the oven to rise, because you want to put it in a warm place. That way it will rise better, especially if you live in a cold climate like me, Canada. It is still in the negatives here. So flash forward, you don't see this bit, but I let it rise for probably an hour and a half. And now that it is risen, I am taking it, oiling my pan, and then spreading it out. I kind of do a mixture of putting it out, like spreading it out with my hands and using a rolling pin. I find it gets the best consistency. And there's little Makai. He was awake for this one and he wanted to help. Seeing him in the background, so cute with his teddies. Next, I moved on to this homemade sauce I had left over in the fridge. That's why I didn't show you a recipe, but it was essentially just frozen pasta sauce that I made from tomatoes from the garden from last fall, defrosted just with some spices. I showed you this Epicure pizza spice that my mom gave us. That's kind of what we put on it. And then I did have cheese and a little bit of nutritional yeast to show you if you're vegan, you can do this. It is expensive, but honestly, compared to the price of cheese, it's actually cheaper. And then I topped it with what we had, which was jalapenos, olives, and some red onions. We don't go crazy. These onions and jalapenos are great toppings because the jar of, what are they? Not onions, olives. The jar of olives were literally like $1.99 and the jalapenos were maybe $2, so they're very cheap. You can see here I made the crust very thin because we like thin crust, but you can make it thicker and it will be more filling that way because the crust is the cheapest part. And if you're wondering, I cooked the pizza for 11 minutes at 425, but you can kind of cook it a little more, a little less, depending on how crispy you like it. Anyway, on to the last 2 recipes. I prepped these on the same day, so I'll kind of be switching back and forth between what I'm making because a lot of it has to rise or whatnot. So today I am making homemade bean veggie burgers with homemade buns, and then also burritos, rice and bean burritos with homemade flatbreads, which you've seen me make a couple times on this channel because they are elite and will save you so much money. And again, making your own buns and flatbreads aren't necessary, but will save you a lot of money. For the black bean burger, a lot of the times I'll just eat it as is without the bun, but Kai does like the buns, so I made them here. And they are also very filling, so they're like a cheap filler. So they're kind of like the side of the bread or the side of the rice for the other dishes. It's something that will fill you up. So right now I'm just prepping my dough for the buns first because they have to rise. It's the only thing that has to rise today. Again, it seems intimidating when you make your buns, but really they're so easy, especially if you made your own bread in the past. I will link down the exact recipe I use. Right here, I'm just covering it with my bowl covers, and if you want to learn how to make these, I'll link the recipe down below, and putting it in my oven to keep it warm and help it rise. And then I'm starting my other thing that will take the longest, which is the flatbreads. But this doesn't have any yeast or anything like that, so they don't need to rise, but you know, it's more time consuming than the other things. And I again made these in my last videos, and I'll link the recipe down below, but it's essentially just flour, salt, oil, and baking soda, and you just knead them together. and then rip off the pieces of the size that you want, roll them into flatbreads and cook them. And then here I'm also doing, which I always do this, I take a couple and cut them up into chips, and I usually eat this for a side on a meal or a snack. So with the veggie burgers, you can take a couple of these with hummus, and it is so filling and so good when they are fresh. And if these ever go stale, the flatbreads, that's what I'll do. Like, I don't just throw them out. If they go stale, I'll cut them up into chips. As I explained in the last video, you just, when you cook them on medium heat until they start bubbling, which like that, you can see that here, and then flip them and cook them on the other side for roughly a minute, and that's literally it. And then when you want to make them into chips, you just cut them into triangle sizes, preheat the oven to 400, and then you cook them for roughly 10-ish minutes, again depending on how crispy you want, but you have to make sure you flip them in between, because if you don't, one side will be super like crispy and almost burnt and the other side won't. And then after these chips were done, I worked on the bread because it was done rising. You can start doing this step once it almost doubled the size, but I would say roughly it would take an hour and a half. But if you live in a warmer climate, it might be quicker, versus a colder climate, it might be a little bit longer, but roughly an hour and a half is a good time to aim for. So I broke them up into roughly 8 sizes to make the buns, rolled them into more of a bun shape, pushed them down and oiled them on top, and then let them rise for another hour-ish, hour and a half, give or take. But I made a mistake today because the oven was still quite warm from cooking the pita chips. It was just really a bad judgment call on my end, because when it's a little bit warm from previous cooking, it helps rise faster, especially in our house. Like I said, it's usually cold because we live in Canada. Although today I wasn't wearing a sweater because for some reason I was having basically heat flashes, and no, I'm not pregnant, but it was still quite cold. So I thought, yeah, putting them in the warm oven will help it rise, which it usually does, but from my lack of judgment, it was still a little bit too warm, and that actually prevents them from rising because it kind of cooks them instead of helping them rise. So you'll see that later. But a thing about being low income and making things from scratch, if it doesn't turn out quite as you thought, you still eat it because you don't want to waste it, and it still fills the hole of your stomach. And they were still good, they just weren't as fluffy as usual. So when you see them, no, they're usually not this flat. It's just I put them in the warm oven and it was too warm. Next, here you can see that I started rinsing my beans and then cooking them, and then I also started cooking my rice because I was multitasking. I like basmati rice, but really any rice works. This one's perfect because you kind of just put it on for 12 minutes and let it do its thing. And if you're living low income, you're trying to save money, one thing I definitely recommend is soaking your own beans and legumes. Although a can of, let's say, black beans, chickpeas, etc. doesn't seem expensive up front, when you soak your own, it saves you so much money, especially if you're like our family and that is a base of your diet, because they're cheap, filling, high in protein, fiber, so many benefits. Just soaking your own and doing a little bit of planning so you know to, soak them the night before will save you so much money. But we actually ran out of black beans the night before, so that's why we were kind of low on them and skimping it in these recipes. But you could definitely add more to the bean and rice burritos and the veggie burgers that I'm making, but we were low. So right now the rice was done cooking and I was just adding the black beans to it. And again, I just add random spices. I don't follow a recipe. Sometimes it turns out better than others, so maybe I should start following and making my own recipe, but just the same spices as before or whatever we have on hand. And then I also added some lime juice. I find that brings out the flavor so nicely, so I would recommend doing that if you're making your own burritos. And we added the extract because yes, I like to use fresh things and real ingredients, but let's be honest, the prices of limes and lemons here in Canada right now are $1, and I just can't stomach buying them all the time. And then here I was cooking a cup of quinoa for the bean burritos, which yields probably double, like 2 cups. And then I was mashing roughly 2 cups of beans, but usually I would add more beans. It's just like I said, we kind of ran out. And then again, with all my other recipes, I kind of just add a little bit of this, a little bit of that, of whatever we have. I don't really follow a specific recipe. You just have to get it into like a texture that forms nice together. You want a little bit of liquid, a little bit of something like oat flour. I added nutritional yeast, salt, tomato paste to give it liquid because you don't really want them dry, right? And then usually I add in some sort of veggie or something that we have on hand. Today I added red onions. I love to add onions into it. You could add garlic. Another great thing to add is carrots, kale. You could add the tomatoes. Really, you can make this a hearty, full of flavor, full of randomness, whatever you have in your fridge going bad type of burger. And they may not look good, but I swear they taste delicious. Here I added some balsamic vinegar and tahini, but again, you can keep it more simple and just what you have, cheaper. You don't need all these random things. It's just we happen to have all these things on hand, but really you just need your starch. So whether that be rice, oat flour, quinoa, and then your beans, any beans of your choice, and form it into a patty. And they're so cheap. Like, beans and rice are so cheap, and you can just use it in multiple different ways, like the burritos I made or these bean burgers. So many different ways to change it up. We eat beans and rice in some form, usually at least twice a week, if not more. And then here you can see the buns, what I was talking about, how they're kind of flat, but they were still good. So I just cut them up here, and then I was going to the burgers and flipping them. I put them in the oven at 350 and cooked it for 10 minutes, flipped them, and then cooked them for roughly 7 minutes. But it's another thing where you kind of just keep an eye on it and cook it as crispy as you like, but that's a good starting guide. And if you are interested, I'll make sure to link recipes for the burgers and the burritos down below that I like. They're not the exact that I'm making today, but ones that are similar and cheap in ingredients and also delicious that I have tried in the past. I just kind of know how to make them now and just put random things in it. Like I said, whatever I have that is going bad or needs to be used up. And you can see like a common theme here. I'm using a lot of the same ingredients, the spices, the red onions, kind of. We have a couple things of the week. Well, the things we have in bulk we always have, but for the fresh things like the onions, we got onions this week because they were on sale. So we use that in like almost every recipe, or just things like that. That's how you can make things more affordable. And then here I'm just plating the bean burritos. And again, I'm using the red onions in it for my veggie. And then I had this one tomato, this one lonely tomato that my mom gave us that we're using. And then homemade salsa that I'm putting on top, because when you make it yourself, it's so much cheaper. And we made a bunch this summer out of tomatoes from the garden, so it was essentially basically free. But I actually filmed a recipe the other day with canned tomatoes, which is not as cheap as tomatoes from your garden, but it's still very cheap, that I'm going to be posting next week, so keep your eye out on that. And then I just pop this in the oven for a couple minutes to make them a little bit crunchy and nice, and then take them out and then cut them, and they're ready to go. I just prepped a couple of these, but I still had plenty of the rice left and the tortillas. I just put the rice in a mason jar and put the tortillas in a bag in the fridge. And there you have it, 5 affordable recipes for low-income families. These are recipes that we make really often, and they're not only cheap but nutritious and delicious. So if you have any comments or concerns or questions, leave them down for me in the comments below, and I'll see you next time with a salsa video.